Nobody expected it. A high-profile town hall, a room filled with reporters, cameras flashing, and a night meant for political discourse. But then, one voice silenced them all. It wasn't a senator or a journalist. It wasn't a businessman or an activist. It was a mother. She wasn't there to debate policies or ask about the economy. She had only one question. A plea. A last, desperate attempt to save her son. And in that moment, as the world watched, Donald Trump made a decision that would leave the entire room in stunned silence. It all began with Rebecca Turner, a woman who had exhausted every option. Her 8-year-old son Daniel was battling acute myeloid leukemia, a fight that had drained her financially and emotionally. She had tried everything: fundraisers, calls to charities, appeals to her insurance, but nothing had worked. And now, with time running out, she was left with one final hope. So, there she stood, gripping the microphone with trembling hands, her voice shaking as she spoke. "Mr. President, I don't need politics. I don't need promises. I just need help." The room fell dead silent. Conversations ceased. Journalists lowered their microphones. Even Trump, who had been flipping through notes, stopped. He lifted his head, eyes locking onto Rebecca. The usual confidence in his demeanor softened slightly, replaced by something else: curiosity, maybe even concern. The energy in the room had changed, and no one could have predicted what would happen next. Rebecca inhaled sharply, forcing herself to steady her voice. "My son, Daniel, is only 8 years old," she said, her voice raw with emotion. "He's kind, he's full of life, and he dreams of becoming a pilot one day, but that dream is slipping away." She paused, her eyes glistening under the stage lights. "He has leukemia. There's a treatment that could save him, but my insurance refuses to cover it. I work 2 jobs. I've sold everything I can, and I've raised money through every means possible. But we're still short." As she spoke, the weight of her words seemed to settle over the audience. A few people in the crowd looked away, uncomfortable. Others clasped their hands together, listening intently. Trump, still watching her closely, leaned slightly forward. Rebecca exhaled a shaky breath and met his gaze. "I've exhausted every resource, and now I'm here, in front of you, begging. Mr. President, will you help my son?" The silence that followed was suffocating. The reporters, sensing a defining moment, trained their cameras directly on Trump, eager to capture his reaction. Some expected him to deflect. Others thought he might offer vague sympathies. But instead, something unexpected happened. Trump sat back in his chair, resting his hand against his chin. For the first time that evening, he seemed to disregard the stage, the cameras, and the political theater surrounding him. He wasn't looking at Rebecca as a voter or a public speaker. He was looking at a mother. And then, in a voice far softer than anyone had anticipated, he asked, "Tell me about Daniel." Rebecca hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the question. She had prepared herself for a political answer, for carefully chosen words meant to sidestep the issue. But this was different. A small, wistful smile broke through her tears. "Daniel is everything to me," she said, her voice warming as she spoke of her son. "He loves airplanes. He tells me all the time that he's going to grow up to be a pilot and fly me around the world. Every night before bed, he makes me promise that no matter what happens, I won't forget that dream." Trump listened intently. "And the treatment? What does it cost?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "It's an experimental program in Texas. The cost is over $450,000. The number hung in the air, heavy and immovable. The crowd murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. Trump didn't react at first. He simply tapped a finger against the arm of his chair, lost in thought. Then, after a long pause, he looked her dead in the eye and said something that left the entire hall in stunned silence. "You don't need to raise another dollar. I'll pay for it." Gasps erupted throughout the room. Reporters scrambled, cameras zoomed in, and even some of Trump's own staff exchanged shocked glances. Rebecca's lips parted, but no words came. It was as if time itself had frozen. She shook her head slightly, almost as if she hadn't heard correctly. "Sir, Trump raised a hand, cutting her off. "No speeches, no politics, just get your son the treatment he needs." The following morning, headlines exploded. Trump's unexpected promise, a mother's plea, changes everything. News channels played the clip on repeat, dissecting every second of the exchange. Social media ignited with debates, some praising his generosity, others questioning his motives. But for Rebecca, none of that mattered. She sat at Daniel's hospital bed holding his hand gently. When he opened his eyes, she whispered the words that had seemed impossible just hours ago. "Baby, you're going to Texas." Daniel blinked up at her, still groggy. "Does that mean I get to fly planes when I grow up?" A fresh wave of tears filled her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. It means exactly that." A week later, a small envelope arrived at the White House. It was from Rebecca. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Mr. President, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need you to know that you didn't just save my son's life. You saved mine. You gave me hope when I had none. Thank you." Trump sat at his desk, holding the letter in his hands. He read it slowly, then placed it carefully inside a drawer. He never spoke publicly about the donation again. But weeks later, when asked about the moment in an interview, he simply said, "Sometimes, the right thing to do isn't about politics. It's about being human." The moment Rebecca received confirmation of the treatment, everything became a blur of movement and urgency. Within 48 hours, she and Daniel were on a private flight to Texas, a journey she had never imagined taking under such circumstances. The arrangements had been handled with remarkable efficiency, discreetly coordinated by Trump's team. There was no press conference, no grand spectacle, just quiet action where it mattered most. As they boarded the plane, Rebecca held Daniel's frail hand in hers, her grip firm but gentle, as if she could physically anchor him to this world a little longer. He clutched his favorite toy airplane in his other hand, his fingers tracing its smooth surface absent-mindedly. He had always dreamed of flying, of soaring above the world and seeing everything from the sky. Now the dream felt fragile, like it could slip through their fingers at any moment. Daniel turned to his mother, his eyes filled with both exhaustion and curiosity. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely above the hum of the aircraft's engines. "Do you think Mr. Trump believes in miracles?" Rebecca's heart clenched. She thought back to the man who had, against all odds, stepped in when no one else did. A man so often painted as brash and indifferent had seen their struggle, had cared enough to act. She squeezed Daniel's hand a little tighter and offered him a soft smile. "I think," she said, "that maybe he just made one happen for us." When they landed, a team of specialists was already waiting at the private terminal. No delays, no distractions, just immediate action. Daniel was swiftly transported to the hospital where the best oncologists in the field were standing by. Dr. Mitchell, a man known for his unshakable focus and unwavering dedication, met Rebecca with a calm but serious expression. "We're fighting against the clock," he admitted, "but the treatment has shown promise in cases like Daniel's. We're going to give it everything we've got." Rebecca nodded, her emotions threatening to spill over, but she held them back. There was no time for fear now. This was it, their last hope. Back in New York, Donald Trump sat in the Oval Office, scrolling through his phone between meetings. His schedule was packed as usual. Policy discussions, economic briefings, a flurry of political obligations that demanded his attention. And yet, amidst it all, a single headline caught his eye. Mother and son arrive in Texas for life-saving treatment. He leaned back in his chair, reading the article in silence. The image that accompanied the story was one he recognized immediately. Daniel stepping off the plane, his toy airplane clutched tightly in his small hands. The boy looked hopeful but fragile. Too fragile. For a long moment, Trump said nothing. He had never been one to get sentimental, at least not in public. But this mattered. Later that evening, as he walked through the White House residence, he turned to his assistant. His voice was quieter than usual, more measured. "Keep me updated on that boy," he said simply. The assistant nodded. "Yes, sir." What the world didn't know, what he never intended for them to know, was that earlier that morning, Trump had personally called the hospital in Texas. No cameras, no press releases, just a quiet inquiry asking for details on Daniel's condition, on the treatment, on what more could be done. Because for all the headlines, this wasn't about politics anymore. Daniel's treatment began immediately. A battle fought minute by minute, hour by hour. The first few days were brutal. His small body endured rounds of medication, blood tests, and endless monitoring. Rebecca stayed by his side, never leaving, barely sleeping. She sat beside his hospital bed, stroking his hair, whispering stories about the adventures he would have one day, the places he would fly to once he was well. But not every moment was filled with hope. Some days, Daniel was too weak to talk, too exhausted to even lift his toy airplane. On those days, Rebecca sat in silence, watching his small chest rise and fall, praying with every breath he took. One night, as the machines beeped softly around them, Daniel turned his head toward her, his voice barely audible. "Mom," he murmured, "I'm gonna beat this." Rebecca bit her lip, fighting back the wave of emotion threatening to consume her. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead and forced a smile. "Yes, baby," she whispered, "you are." Thousands of miles away, in Washington, Trump continued asking for updates. 3 weeks later, Rebecca's phone rang. She almost didn't answer. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, every ounce of her energy focused on Daniel's fight. But when she saw the caller ID, her heart skipped a beat. White House. She swallowed hard and pressed the answer button. "Hello?" A voice she never expected to hear greeted her. "Rebecca, it's Donald." She froze, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Mr. President?" she asked, her voice shaking. Trump's tone was calm, direct. "How's Daniel?" Tears burned at the edges of her eyes. He's responding to treatment," she said, barely able to get the words out. "The doctors think he has a real chance." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a slow exhale. "That's good," Trump said. "That's real good." Rebecca hesitated, unsure of how to express everything she was feeling. "I don't know how to thank you," she said finally. Trump's voice softened, a rare moment of sincerity. "You don't have to," he said. "Just tell Daniel to keep fighting. That's all that matters." As the call ended, Rebecca sat there in stunned silence, staring at her phone. Of all the things she had expected in this journey, a personal call from the president was not one of them. And yet, somehow, it meant more than she could ever put into words. Months passed. The treatments continued. Every day was a battle. But then, a breakthrough. The doctors ran their final tests and the results left them speechless. The cancer was in full remission. Rebecca collapsed into tears, sobbing into her hands as Dr. Mitchell placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Your son is going to be okay," he said. "He's won." Daniel, still weak but beaming, clutched his toy airplane in both hands. "Mom," he whispered, his voice full of wonder, I'm gonna fly. Rebecca nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Thousands of miles away, in the White House, Trump sat at his desk when his assistant walked in, handing him a small note. Daniel Turner, cancer-free. Trump read the words once, then twice. He set the note down, staring at it for a long moment. He didn't say anything, because some moments didn't need words. Some moments spoke for themselves.